The foreclosure notice slipped from my trembling fingers as I read the words that shattered my world. Final notice. Property will be seized in 30 days. But I'd never missed a mortgage payment in my life, never even been late on a single bill. That's when I saw it. My own signature on loan documents I'd never signed, my credit destroyed by someone who knew exactly how to forge my handwriting. My name is Delilah Crane, and I just discovered my twin sister Vivienne didn't just steal my identity for credit cards, she'd been systematically destroying my entire financial life for 3 years. What she didn't know was that I was about to turn her own weapons against her, and by the time I was done, she'd learn that sometimes the prey becomes the predator. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. I stood frozen in the marble foyer of my Rosewood Heights townhouse, the same home I'd saved 10 years to buy, watching my American dream crumble in real time. The morning sun streamed through the stained glass windows I'd personally selected, casting rainbow patterns across legal documents that spelled out my financial ruin. This couldn't be happening, not to someone who balanced her checkbook to the penny and had a 401k that my financial advisor called impressively robust for someone your age. But the evidence was undeniable. Spread across my antique dining table were credit reports that read like a horror novel written in financial terminology. 17 credit cards I'd never applied for. 6 personal loans I'd never requested. A second mortgage on my home that I'd discovered only when the foreclosure notice arrived. Each document bore my signature, not a perfect forgery but close enough to fool bank employees who saw hundreds of applications daily. My hands shook as I reached for my phone to call my best friend Autumn, the only person I trusted to see me completely fall apart without judgment. We'd been roommates at Crestwood College, study partners through business school, and she'd been my maid of honor at my wedding to James 3 years ago. If anyone could help me make sense of this nightmare, it was her. Delilah? Autumn's voice was warm with concern the moment she heard my tone. What's wrong? You sound like you've seen a ghost. Worse, I whispered, sinking into my kitchen chair. I think I've seen my future and it's bankruptcy court. 20 minutes later, Autumn burst through my front door with coffee and the kind of fierce determination that had gotten her through law school while working 2 jobs. She'd changed from her usual courthouse attire into jeans and a sweater, but her lawyer brain was already in full analytical mode. Show me everything, she said, setting down the coffee and pulling out her laptop. And I mean everything, Delilah. Bank statements, credit reports, any communication you've had with these companies. As we spread the documents across my dining room table, a pattern emerged that made my stomach churn. The timeline was surgical in its precision. Each fraudulent account had been opened during periods when Vivienne had stayed at my house. Christmas visits. The week she'd claimed to have bronchitis and needed sisterly care. The long weekend when she'd helped me redecorate my guest bathroom. Look at this, Autumn said, pointing to a credit card application dated 6 months ago. This was opened the day after your birthday party. Vivienne was here, wasn't she? I nodded, remembering how helpful my twin had been, insisting on cleaning up while I'd taken a long bath after too much wine. She'd had complete access to my mail, my personal documents, even my laptop. The same laptop where I kept digital copies of important paperwork for safekeeping. There's more, I said, pulling out a folder I'd been dreading to open. I called 3 of these credit card companies this morning. They all have recorded phone calls of someone claiming to be me, requesting credit limit increases and cash advances. Someone with my voice, who knew my mother's maiden name, my first pet's name, all my security questions. Autumn's expression darkened. Vivienne would know all those details. My twin sister, the person who'd shared my mother's womb, my childhood bedroom, every family vacation and birthday party for 28 years. Vivienne, who'd always been the charming one, the spontaneous one, the one who could talk her way out of trouble while I was the responsible twin who cleaned up her messes. But this wasn't a broken vase or a borrowed dress returned stain. This was my life. Methodically dismantled by someone who'd learned my patterns, studied my habits, and exploited every detail of our shared history. My phone buzzed with a text from my mother, looking forward to Sunday dinner. Vivienne has some exciting news to share about her new business venture. She's doing so well lately, you should be proud of your sister. I stared at the message, pieces clicking into place with horrifying clarity. Vivienne's new business venture, her sudden ability to afford designer clothes and that flashy red Maserati she'd been driving around Millbrook Falls, the expensive dinners she'd been posting on social media, always at Thornfield's, the most exclusive restaurant in our hometown. She's been funding her lifestyle with my stolen identity, I said aloud, the words tasting bitter. Every designer bag, every vacation photo she's posted, every penny of her so-called business success, it's all been bought with my destroyed credit. Autumn reached across the table and squeezed my hand. We're going to fix this, Delilah. But first, we need to understand exactly how deep this goes. Over the next 2 hours, we discovered the scope of Vivienne's betrayal was staggering. She hadn't just opened accounts, she'd been systematically draining them, making minimum payments to keep everything current while maximizing the damage to my credit utilization ratio. It was sophisticated, calculated, and demonstrated a level of financial knowledge that my scattered sister had apparently been hiding for years. The doorbell rang, interrupting our investigation. Through the peephole, I saw a delivery driver holding an envelope marked urgent, legal notice. Inside was a summons for a civil lawsuit. Someone was suing me for $45,000 in unpaid contractor fees for home renovations I'd never authorized. According to the attached documents, I'd allegedly hired Pemberton Construction to renovate a vacation cabin in Willowbrook, a property I'd never seen, let alone owned. This is it, I said, my voice eerily calm as rage replaced shock. This is where I stop being the victim. Autumn looked up from her laptop where she'd been researching identity theft laws. What are you thinking? I walked to my window, looking out at the neighborhood where I'd planned to raise children with James, where I'd imagined growing old. All of it was slipping away because someone who shared my DNA had decided my life was hers to pillage. I'm thinking, I said slowly, that Vivienne is about to learn that two can play the identity game. But when I'm done, she won't just lose her credit, she'll lose everything she's built on my stolen foundation. The war was about to begin, and this time I wasn't going to be the responsible twin who cleaned up the mess. I was going to be the one who made. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Let me tell you about the Crane twins and how we ended up here, because understanding our history is crucial to understanding why what happened next was inevitable. Vivienne and I were born 12 minutes apart in Elmbridge General Hospital, but those 12 minutes might as well have been 12 years for how differently our parents treated us. I came out first, screaming and red-faced, already demanding attention. Vivienne slipped into the world quietly, with what the nurses called an angel's temperament. From that moment on, our roles were set in stone. I was the responsible one. The one who reminded Mom about parent-teacher conferences, who made sure Vivienne had lunch money, who did both our homework when she claimed to be too stressed to focus. Vivienne was the charming one, the one who could sweet-talk her way out of detention, who made friends effortlessly, who never met a rule she couldn't bend with a smile and a sob story. Our childhood home in Elmbridge was a shrine to Vivienne's achievements. Dance recital photos, cheerleading trophies, homecoming queen crown, while my academic awards and debate team medals were relegated to a small shelf in the hallway. When I graduated valedictorian, the family celebration lasted exactly as long as it took to eat dinner. When Vivienne was voted most likely to succeed despite having a C average, Dad threw her a party that lasted until midnight. The pattern continued through college. I earned a full scholarship to Crestwood College, majored in finance with a minor in accounting, graduated summa cum laude, and landed a prestigious job at Meridian Financial Group. Vivienne enrolled in 3 different colleges over 6 years, changed majors 8 times, and finally graduated with a degree in communications from Bayfield Community College, a degree our parents proudly announced to everyone as just as valuable as Delilah's fancy business degree. But here's what I never understood until now. While I was building my career brick by brick, Vivienne was studying me, learning my patterns, memorizing my security questions, observing how I managed money. She knew I checked my credit report religiously every 6 months. She knew I used the same bank I'd had since college. She knew I kept important documents in the oak filing cabinet in my home office, organized by category and date. Most importantly, she knew I trusted her completely. The trust between us had been weaponized so gradually that I never saw it coming. It started small, borrowing my car when hers was in the shop, staying at my place when she was between apartments, asking me to co-sign for a small personal loan that she absolutely promised to pay back on time. Each request came with tears, with promises, with stories about how this one favor would turn her life around, and I said yes every time because that's what the responsible twin does. Autumn had been warning me for years. "Delilah," she'd said over wine at Blackstone Bistro just 6 months ago, "you're not helping her by always fixing her problems, you're enabling her." But I'd defended Vivienne, the way I always did. "She's family, Autumn. She's going through a rough patch, but she's figuring it out. You'll see." Now, sitting in my kitchen with evidence of Vivienne's betrayal spread across the table like a toxic treasure map, Autumn's words echoed in my mind with devastating clarity. I hadn't been helping my sister, I'd been training her to take advantage of me. My phone rang, interrupting my thought. Mom's contact photo filled the screen, the same family portrait from last Christmas, where Vivienne and I wore matching red sweaters, our arms around each other, both smiling like we meant it. "Delilah, honey," Mom's voice bubbled with excitement. "I just got off the phone with Vivienne. She's having such a wonderful year. Did you know her consulting business is doing so well that she's thinking about expanding to Denver? She's even considering buying that adorable cottage on Maple Street. You know, the one with the blue shutters that we always admire." My grip tightened on the phone. The cottage on Maple Street was worth at least $400,000. There was no way Vivienne's mysterious consulting business was generating that kind of income legitimately. "That's great, Mom," I managed, my voice steady despite the fury building in my chest. "I'm so proud of both my girls," Mom continued. "You with your stable corporate job, and Vivienne with her entrepreneurial spirit. She gets that from your father, you know, always willing to take risks, to think outside the box. Think outside the box. Is that what we were calling identity theft now? Actually, Mom, I wanted to talk to you about Vivienne." "Oh, before I forget," Mom interrupted. "She's bringing someone special to Sunday dinner this week, a new boyfriend named Trevor. Apparently he's some kind of investment banker from Westfield. Vivienne says he's very successful, drives a BMW, the whole package. I think this might be serious." An investment banker. Of course, Vivienne had always been attracted to men with money, but she'd never been able to keep them interested once they realized she had none of her own, unless of course she'd been presenting herself as someone financially successful, someone like me. "Mom," I tried again, "I really need to discuss something important about Vivienne with you and Dad." "Well, why don't you come to dinner on Sunday and we can all chat together? It'll be like old times. I'm making that pot roast you girls always loved, and Vivienne specifically requested my famous apple pie. She says Trevor has a sweet tooth." The casual mention of family traditions being used to impress Vivienne's new victim made my stomach turn. How many lies was she telling this Trevor? How much of my life had she borrowed to make herself seem like a catch worth pursuing? After I hung up, Autumn looked at me with the expression she wore in court when she knew the opposing counsel was hiding something crucial. "Your mom still doesn't know, does she?" "She doesn't want to know," I corrected. "There's a difference. Mom spent 30 years perfecting the art of not seeing Vivienne's flaws. She's not going to start now." Autumn opened her laptop and pulled up a social media profile. "Before you make any decisions about how to handle this, there's something else you need to see." On the screen was Vivienne's Instagram account, which I'd avoided looking at for months, because her posts about her amazing new life always made me feel guilty for not being happier for her success. Now, scrolling through the feed with new eyes, every image told a different story. There was Vivienne at a charity gala in Harbor City, wearing a $3,000 evening gown and sporting what looked like a genuine Cartier watch. The caption read, "So grateful for this life and the opportunities I've created for myself. Blessed entrepreneur life, success." Another photo showed her at a weekend spa retreat in Ashford Springs, getting couples massages with a man I assumed was Trevor. The geotag showed it was the kind of resort that charged $500 per night minimum. but it was the most recent post that made my blood run cold. Vivienne stood in front of a sold sign outside a charming Victorian house in Greenwood Heights, the exact neighborhood where James and I had been house hunting before my credit was destroyed. The caption read, "Dreams do come true when you work hard and stay focused." Just closed on my first investment property, building wealth one smart decision at a time, property investor, millionaire minds, girl boss. She bought a house, I whispered. With my stolen credit, she actually bought a house. Autumn leaned back in her chair, her lawyer mind clearly already working through the implications. Delilah, this isn't just identity theft anymore, this is wire fraud, mortgage fraud, possibly money laundering. We're talking about federal crime. I stared at the photo of my twin sister celebrating her success with my money, in front of a house she'd purchased with my destroyed credit, while my own home sat under foreclosure notice. Good, I said quietly, because what I'm planning isn't just going to ruin her credit, it's going to destroy the entire fantasy life she's built on my foundation. Autumn raised an eyebrow. What exactly are you planning? I smiled for the first time in days, but it wasn't a pleasant expression. I'm going to become the sister she never knew she had, the one who plays by her rules instead of mine. Outside my window, the sun was setting over Rosewood Heights, painting the sky the color of blood. Tomorrow, the real game would begin. The next morning I sat in James's home office, surrounded by financial documents that painted a picture I desperately wanted to disbelieve. My husband had taken one look at the evidence spread across our dining room table the night before and immediately shifted into crisis management mode, his years as a corporate attorney kicking in automatically. Maybe we're jumping to conclusions, James said carefully, adjusting his wire-rimmed glasses as he reviewed the credit reports for the third time. His voice carried that measured tone he used when he was trying to be diplomatic about something that clearly infuriated him. Identity theft is usually committed by strangers, people who steal mail or hack databases, family members. They usually ask for help first. I wanted to believe him. God, how I wanted to believe that there was some other explanation for the mountain of evidence against Vivienne. Maybe she'd been a victim too, and someone had stolen both our identities. Maybe there'd been some kind of administrative error at the credit bureaus. Maybe this was all an elaborate misunderstanding that would be cleared up with a few phone calls. Look at these addresses, I said, pointing to a credit card statement. This one was sent to 1247 Riverside Drive, apartment 3B. That's Vivienne's old place in Thorndale. And this one went to Mom and Dad's house on Elm Street. She had the bills redirected so I'd never see them. James frowned at the documents, his methodical mind clearly struggling with the implications. But the signatures, I mean, forgery is a serious crime. Vivienne might be irresponsible with money, but she's not a criminal. That's when Autumn knocked on our front door, carrying a large coffee and a manila folder that immediately made my stomach drop. She'd clearly been up all night, her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy bun, her lawyer blazer replaced with jeans and an oversized sweat. I couldn't sleep, she announced, settling into our living room with the determination of someone who'd spent hours researching. So I did some digging into Vivienne's background, financial background. She opened the folder and spread out printouts, public records, court documents, business filings that I'd never known existed. Did you know that Vivienne has been evicted twice in the past 2 years? Autumn, once from that apartment on Riverside Drive, and once from a place in Westfield Heights that she apparently abandoned in the middle of the night, leaving behind 3 months of unpaid rent. James leaned forward, his skepticism wavering. I thought she moved because she wanted something closer to work. There's more, Autumn continued, pulling out another document. She filed for unemployment benefits last January, claiming she was laid off from her job at Pinnacle Marketing. But according to their HR department, she was actually fired for expense account fraud. The words hit me like a physical blow. Expense account fraud. While I'd been defending Vivienne to anyone who'd listen, she'd already been stealing from her employee. And this consulting business your mom mentioned. Autumn slid another paper across the coffee table. I can't find any business registration, no tax filings, no LLC formation. As far as the state of Connecticut is concerned, Delilah Crane Consulting doesn't exist. James picked up the unemployment filing, studying it with the attention to detail that made him such a good attorney. This application lists her previous income as $75,000 annually. If she was making that much, why would she need to? He trailed off, the implications finally sinking. If Vivienne had been making decent money, and still managed to get evicted, still got fired for fraud, still needed to file for unemployment, then her financial problems ran much deeper than occasional irresponsibility. She's been living beyond her means for years, I said quietly. And when her legitimate income couldn't support her lifestyle anymore, she found another source. But even as the evidence mounted, part of me kept searching for alternative explanations. This was my twin sister, the person who'd shared my bedroom until we were 15, who'd cried in my arms when our grandfather died, who'd been my maid of honor when I married James. People don't just wake up one day and decide to destroy their siblings' life. Maybe she's in some kind of trouble, I suggested, grasping for any scenario that didn't make Vivienne a calculating predator. Maybe someone's forcing her to do this, like what if she owes money to dangerous people, and this was the only way to pay them back? Autumn gave me the look she reserved for clients who were in denial about losing their cases. Delilah, honey, look at her Instagram posts again. Does that look like someone who's being coerced into anything? She pulled up Vivienne's social media on her phone, scrolling through months of photos that told a story of escalating luxury, designer handbags, expensive restaurants, weekend trips to Martha's Vineyard, spa days that cost more than some people's monthly rent. These aren't the posts of someone who's desperate or being threatened, Autumn said gently. These are the posts of someone who's enjoying the fruits of their criminal activity. James stood up and walked to our window, staring out at the garden we'd planted together last spring. The roses were blooming now, their red petals bright against the morning sun, a stark contrast to the dark conversation happening in our living room. What I don't understand, he said slowly, is the timing. Why now? You two have been close your whole lives. What changed? I thought about that question, replaying the past few years in my mind. What had changed? When had Vivienne's occasional requests for help turned into systematic exploitation? My promotion, I said suddenly. Remember when I got promoted to senior financial analyst last year? There was that article about me in the Meridian Company newsletter, talking about my financial planning expertise and how I'd built substantial savings despite starting with student loans. Autumn looked up from her phone. You think that triggered something? I think it gave her an idea, I said, pieces clicking into place. For years she'd been jealous of my stability, my credit score, my ability to get approved for loans. The company newsletter basically advertised how financially reliable I was. James turned back toward us, his expression grim. So she decided to become you, not become me, I corrected, feeling a chill run down my spine. Use me. My phone buzzed with a text message, and Vivienne's name appeared on the screen. For a moment I hesitated to open it, afraid of what new level of manipulation might be waiting for me. The message was short. Can't wait for Sunday dinner. Trevor is so excited to meet my amazing family. I've told him so much about how close we are. Love you, sis. I showed the text to James and Autumn, watching their expressions shift from concern to something approaching anger. She's bringing her boyfriend to family dinner, I said, the one she's probably told is dating a successful businesswoman. She's going to parade him around our parents' house, let him meet the family of the identity she's stolen. That's incredibly bold, James said, or incredibly stupid. Both, Autumn corrected, and it gives us an opportunity. I looked at her, recognizing the calculating expression she wore when she'd found a weakness in opposing counsel's case. What kind of opportunity? The kind where we let Vivienne hang herself with her own rope, Autumn's. But first we need to know exactly what she's told this Trevor about herself, about you. James sat back down, his legal training taking over. If she's misrepresenting herself to him using your credentials, your financial status, that could be fraud on multiple levels. And if he's investing in her fake consulting business, or if they're making joint financial decisions based on her lies about her income and assets. Autumn's voice trailed off as she considered the possibility. I felt something shift inside me, a hardening of resolve that surprised me with its intensity. You know what? Maybe James is right. Maybe I should give her the benefit of the doubt. Maybe I should go to Sunday dinner and have a nice calm conversation with my sister about this whole misunderstanding. Autumn raised an eyebrow. Really? Really, I said? my voice taking on a sweetness that would have made Vivienne proud. I think it's time I met this Trevor and learned more about my sister's amazing new life. After all, we're twins. We should share everything. James looked between Autumn and me, clearly sensing undercurrents he didn't fully understand. Delilah, what are you planning? I smiled, feeling more like myself than I had in years. I'm planning to be the supportive sister Vivienne expects me to be. The one who's so happy for her success that I just can't help but ask lots of questions about how she achieved it. The doubt was fading, replaced by something much more dangerous. Clarity. Vivienne had counted on my willingness to make excuses for her, to find alternative explanations for her behavior, to choose family harmony over uncomfortable truths. She'd weaponized my love for her, turned my loyalty into a tool for her own gain. But that was the old Delilah. The new one was about to show my dear sister exactly what happened when you mistook kindness for weakness. Sunday arrived with the kind of crisp autumn weather that made Elmbridge look like a postcard, all golden leaves and cozy front porches. I stood on my parents' doorstep, holding a bottle of wine and practicing my smile in the reflection of the storm door. Behind me, James adjusted his tie nervously, still not entirely comfortable with what I'd planned for this family dinner. Remember, I whispered to him as footsteps approached from inside, we're just here to observe and gather information. Nothing confrontational. Dad opened the door with his usual bear hug enthusiasm, his face lighting up at the sight of his daughters together. At 62, Richard Crane still commanded respect at Elmbridge General Hospital, where he'd been chief of cardiology for 15 years. His word was law in medical matters, and he'd carried that authoritative confidence into every aspect of family life. There's my successful girl, he boomed, ushering us into the familiar warmth of my childhood home. Come in, come in. Your mother's been cooking all day and Vivienne's already here with that young man of hers. The living room looked exactly as it had throughout my childhood, cream-colored sofas arranged around the brick fireplace, family photos covering every surface, Mom's collection of ceramic angels displayed on the mantel. But the atmosphere felt different now, charged with undercurrents I'd never noticed before. Vivienne sat on the couch wearing an emerald green wrap dress that I immediately recognized as costing at least $800, her dark hair styled in perfect waves. Beside her sat a man who could have stepped out of a banking magazine, tall, impeccably groomed, wearing a suit that screamed expensive tailor. Delilah, Vivienne jumped up with the kind of enthusiasm that would have convinced anyone watching that we were the closest sisters in the world. She hugged me tightly and I caught a whiff of perfume that cost more than some people's monthly grocery budget. I'm so excited for you to meet Trevor. Trevor Blackstone stood and extended a perfectly manicured hand, his smile displaying the kind of dental work that suggested serious money. I've heard so much about you, Delilah. Vivienne talks about you constantly. Says you're the smartest person she knows. That's so sweet of her, I replied, noting how Trevor's eyes lingered on James's modest watch and off-the-rack suit with barely concealed assessment. I've been looking forward to meeting the man who's made my sister so happy. Mom bustled in from the kitchen, wearing her favorite Sunday dress and the pearls Dad had given her for their 25th anniversary. Ellen Crane had perfected the art of gracious hostility over 30 years of family gatherings, and today she was in full hostess mode. Dinner's almost ready, she announced, then turned to Trevor with the kind of smile she usually reserved for visiting dignitaries. Trevor, dear, I hope you saved room for dessert. I made apple pie from scratch. It's a family recipe. Everything smells incredible, Mrs. Crane, Trevor said with practiced charm. Vivienne told me you were an amazing cook, but she didn't mention you could work miracles. I watched this performance with new eyes, noting how effortlessly Vivienne had integrated her boyfriend into our family dynamics. She'd clearly briefed him on all the right things to say, coached him on how to charm our parents. What I wanted to know was what she'd told him about herself. So Trevor, I said as we settled into the dining room around Mom's antique mahogany table, Vivienne mentioned you work in investment banking. That must be exciting. It has its moments, Trevor replied, cutting into his pot roast with the precision of someone accustomed to expensive restaurants. I'm a senior portfolio manager at Hartwell & Associates in Westfield. We primarily handle high net worth clients, private wealth management, that sort of thing. James and I exchanged glances, Hartwell and Associates was one of the most prestigious firms in the state, the kind of place that managed money for old New England families and tech entrepreneurs. That's impressive, James said. I imagine you work with some fascinating clients. The work is rewarding, Trevor agreed, then turned toward Vivienne with obvious admiration. Though I have to say, meeting someone with Vivienne's entrepreneurial spirit has been refreshing. Most of the women I meet in my circles are more interested in spending money than making. Dad leaned forward with the enthusiasm he always showed when discussing business success. We're so proud of what Vivienne's accomplished with her consulting firm. From 0 to 6 figures in less than 2 years. That takes real vision. 6 figures. I nearly choked on my wine. According to Trevor's body language, this was news to him too, though he recovered quickly. Vivienne's been modest about her success, Trevor said carefully. She mentioned she was doing well, but 6 figures. That's incredible. Oh, she's always been humble about her achievements. Mom chimed in, beaming at Vivienne. Ever since she was little, she never wanted to brag about her accomplishments. Unlike some people. The pointed glance in my direction was subtle but unmistakable. Even now, even with all the evidence of Vivienne's fraud, Mom was still positioning me as the less admirable daughter. What exactly does your consulting firm specialize in? I asked Vivienne directly. My voice carefully neutral. For just a fraction of a second, Vivienne's confident expression flickered. Strategic business development, she said smoothly. I help small businesses optimize their financial operations, develop growth strategies. That sort of thing. That's fascinating. I continued, ignoring James's warning look. It sounds very similar to what I do at Meridian Financial. Maybe we could collaborate on something sometime. Oh, that would be wonderful. Mom exclaimed. My girls working together, I've always dreamed of that. Actually, Vivienne said quickly. My client base is pretty specialized. Most of them prefer to work exclusively through me. You know how it is with trust-based relationships. Trevor nodded knowingly. Client confidentiality is crucial in wealth management. I completely understand, but I caught the slight confusion in his eyes. Something wasn't adding up for him either. Where did you go to school for business? Trevor asked Vivienne. And I realized this was a question he'd apparently never thought to ask before. Another flicker of uncertainty crossed Vivienne's face. Bayfield Community College. Dad answered proudly before she could respond. But she's always been naturally gifted with numbers and strategy. Some people have MBAs, and still can't think their way out of a paper bag. I watched Trevor process this information, saw him mentally comparing a community college communications degree with 6-figure consulting success. The math wasn't working for him. Community college can provide excellent practical education, Trevor said diplomatically, but his investment banker's mind was clearly running calculations. Vivienne's proof that you don't need fancy credentials to succeed, Mom said firmly, shooting another pointed look in my direction. Hard work and natural talent beat expensive degrees every time. The irony was staggering. Here was my mother praising Vivienne's success that was literally built on my expensive degrees and credentials, while simultaneously diminishing my legitimate achievement. Speaking of success, I said, deciding to push a little harder, I saw on Instagram that you bought that beautiful house in Rosewood Heights. The market there is so competitive. You must have had an excellent credit score to get finance. Vivienne's hand tightened almost imperceptibly on her wine glass. I was fortunate to find a great mortgage broker, she said. Someone who really understood my business model. Smart. Trevor agreed. Property investment is always wise. I've been thinking about expanding my own portfolio. Maybe Vivienne could give you some advice, I suggested innocently. Since she's clearly mastered the art of building wealth quickly. That's when Dad leaned back in his chair with the satisfied expression of a man about to deliver what he considered wisdom. You know what I told both my girls when they were growing up? He said, looking directly at me. Success isn't about following rules. It's about finding creative solutions. Vivienne's always understood that. She thinks outside the box, takes calculated risks. I repeated slowly. That's certainly one way to put it. Some people are too afraid of failure to ever really succeed, Dad continued, warming to his theme. They follow every rule, dot every I, cross every T, but they never break through to the next level because they're not willing to take chances. I felt James's hand find mine under the table, a steady anchor as my father essentially praised the criminal creativity that was destroying my life. Of course, Mom added. We've always taught both girls to be responsible, but responsibility doesn't have to mean playing it safe all the time. Absolutely, Vivienne agreed, her confidence fully restored. Sometimes you have to be willing to leverage opportunities that others might miss. Trevor nodded along, but I could see the wheels turning in his mind. Something about this conversation was bothering him, though he couldn't quite put his finger on what. As Mom served her famous apple pie, I realized that nothing I could say tonight would change my parents' perspective. They had 30 years of practice at explaining away Vivienne's behavior, at reframing her failures as misunderstood genius. They weren't going to start questioning her success now, especially not in front of her impressive new boyfriend. But Trevor was already questioning it. I could see it in the way he watched Vivienne, the slight furrow in his brow when she talked about her business, the calculating look in his eyes when he thought no one was watching. He was an investment banker, trained to spot inconsistencies, to identify risks, and Vivienne had just presented him with a portfolio full of red flags. The drive home from my parents' house was silent except for the sound of rain beginning to patter against the windshield. James gripped the steering wheel with white knuckles, his jaw set in a way that told me he was processing everything he'd witnessed at dinner. I stared out the passenger window at the familiar streets of Elmbridge, seeing them differently now, not as the safe haven of my childhood, but as the place where I'd learned to accept unacceptable behavior in the name of family harmony. Your parents really don't see it, do they? James finally said as we pulled into our driveway. They genuinely believe Vivienne is this successful entrepreneur who just happens to be naturally gifted at making money. They see what they want to see, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. They always. But something had shifted during that dinner. Something fundamental and irreversible. Watching my parents praise Vivienne's success while she sat there wearing my stolen financial identity like a costume had crystallized. Something that had been building for weeks. I was done being the family scapegoat, done making excuses, done protecting people who had never protected me. Inside our house, I went straight to my home office and pulled out the folder Autumn had prepared. Pages of evidence, financial documents, legal precedent. James followed me, loosening his tie as he settled into the reading chair by the window. What are you thinking? He asked, though his tone suggested he already knew. I'm thinking about what Trevor said tonight, I replied, spreading documents across my desk, about client confidentiality and trust-based relationships, about how important it is to verify credentials before making financial decisions. James raised an eyebrow. You're going to tell him the truth about Vivienne. I'm going to give him the tools to discover the truth himself, I corrected. There's a difference. My phone buzzed with a text message, and I wasn't surprised to see it was from Vivienne. Thank you so much for being wonderful tonight. Trevor was so impressed with my family. He said meeting you made him understand why I'm so grounded and successful. Love you, sis. I showed the message to James, watching his expression shift from confusion to disgust. She's actually thanking you for helping her deceive him. She thinks she's won, I said quietly. She thinks she's successfully used our family dinner to legitimize herself in Trevor's eyes. What she doesn't realize is that she just gave him a front row seat to all the inconsistencies in her story. James stood and walked to the window, looking out at our small but well-maintained garden. Delilah, if you do this, if you expose her, there's no going back. Your family will never forgive you. My family hasn't been my family for a long time, I replied, surprised by how calm I sounded. They've been Vivienne's protection squad. I'm just the supporting character who's supposed to make everyone else look good. That's when my phone rang, and I was shocked to see Trevor's name on the caller ID. James and I exchanged glances as I answered. Delilah, this is Trevor Blackstone. I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from Vivienne's phone when she stepped away for a moment. My heart rate picked up. Of course, Trevor. What can I do for you? I was wondering if you might have some time to talk, he said, his voice carrying the careful neutrality of someone navigating delicate territory. About business, about the financial consulting industry. I have some questions that I think you might be able to help me with. I looked at James, who was listening intently to my side of the conversation. This was it. The opening I'd been hoping for but hadn't expected to come so quickly. I'd be happy to chat, I said. Would you like to meet for coffee sometime this week? Actually, Trevor said, and I could hear the urgency beneath his professional tone. I was hoping we could talk sooner, tonight. If possible. I know it's last minute. Well, there are some things about the financial industry that I'm trying to understand, and Vivienne suggested you'd be the perfect person to ask. I doubt Vivienne had suggested any such thing, but I wasn't about to correct him. I could meet you at Blackstone Cafe on Main Street in an hour, I offered. It's usually quiet on Sunday evenings. Perfect. And Delilah, I'd prefer if we kept this conversation between us for now. I don't want Vivienne to think I'm bothering her sister with work questions. After I hung up, James sat back down, his expression serious. He knows something's wrong. He's an investment banker who's trained to spot fraud, I said, grabbing my purse and checking my appearance in the hallway mirror. I could see it in his eyes tonight. He was adding up numbers that didn't make sense. Are you sure about this? James asked. Once you tell him the truth, you can't control what happens next. I paused at our front door, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. The foreclosure notice, the destroyed credit, the family dinner where my parents had praised criminal behavior while dismissing my legitimate achievements. Vivienne's text, thanking me for helping her deceive another victim. James, I said, finally, I've spent my entire life trying to control what other people think and feel and do. I've made myself smaller to make Vivienne look bigger. I've stayed quiet to keep peace. I've taken responsibility for problems I didn't create, and apologized for consequences I didn't cause. I opened the door, feeling autumn air rush in along with a sense of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. I'm not going to control what happens next, I continued. I'm just going to tell the truth and let everyone else decide what to do with it. The drive to Blackstone Cafe took 10 minutes, but it felt like crossing into a different country. By the time I parked, my hands had stopped shaking, and my breathing had steadied. Whatever happened in the next hour would change everything. But for the first time in months, that felt like progress instead of catastrophe. Trevor was already waiting in a corner booth, still wearing his dinner attire but looking significantly less polished than he had at my parents' house. His perfectly styled hair was slightly mussed, as if he'd been running his hands through it, and there were worry lines around his eyes that hadn't been visible earlier. Thank you for meeting me, he said as I slid into the booth across from him. I ordered you a coffee. I hope that's okay. That's perfect, I replied, noting how he'd chosen the most private seating area in the cafe, away from other customers and potential eavesdroppers. Trevor was quiet for a moment, clearly organizing his thoughts with the precision of someone accustomed to high-stakes conversation. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful but direct. Delilah, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be completely honest with me. Is Vivienne really running a six-figure consulting business? The question hung between us like a challenge. I could lie, make excuses, protect my sister the way my family had always protected her, or I could do something I'd never done before in my life. Choose truth over family loyalty. No, I said simply, she's not. Trevor's shoulders sagged slightly, as if my confirmation of his suspicions was both a relief and a disappointment. I've been in finance for 12 years, he said quietly. I know what six-figure business success looks like, and I know what community college communications graduates usually accomplish in their first few years out of school. The numbers don't add up. They don't. I agreed. But she's clearly making money somewhere, Trevor continued. The car, the clothes, the house she just bought, that's real money, not pretend money. I took a sip of my coffee, buying myself a moment to consider my next words carefully. Once I spoke them, there would be no going back for any of. Trevor, I said finally, before I answer that question, I need you to understand something. What I'm about to tell you will change how you see Vivienne, how you see my family, and how you see this entire situation. Are you sure you want to know? He met my eyes with the steady gaze of someone who'd built his career on making difficult decisions based on uncomfortable truths. Yes, he said. I need to. I reached into my purse and pulled out a single document, a credit report summary that Autumn had prepared, with Vivienne's fraudulent accounts highlighted in yellow. The money you've seen Vivienne spending, I said, sliding the paper across the table. It's real money, but it's not her money. It's mine. Trevor's face went through a series of expressions as he studied the credit report: confusion, disbelief, and finally, the cold calculation of a man who'd just realized he'd been professionally deceived. He set the document down carefully, as if it might explode, and looked at me with the kind of intensity I imagined he reserved for major financial presentations. Identity theft, he said quietly, not asking but confirming what he was seeing. Your sister has been using your credit to fund her lifestyle. For over 3 years, I confirmed, pulling out my phone to show him the folder of evidence Autumn and I had compiled. This is just the summary. The full documentation includes 17 credit cards, 6 personal loans, a second mortgage on my house, and a car lease for that BMW she's been driving. Trevor's investment banker training kicked in immediately. He began asking questions with surgical precision about dates, amounts, verification processes, how long each account had been active. I realized he was building his own mental spreadsheet, calculating not just the financial damage but the sophistication required to pull off such an extensive fraud. The house in Greenwood Heights, he said, scrolling through photos on my phone that showed fraudulent loan applications. She used your credit score to qualify for the mortgage, a $420,000 purchase, I confirmed, with a down payment that came from cash advances on cards opened in my name. Trevor leaned back in the booth, running a hand through his perfectly styled hair. Jesus, Delilah, this isn't just identity theft. This is systematic financial abuse. The level of planning, the coordination required. She's been running this like a business operation. That's when I pulled out the folder Autumn had prepared with our deeper investigation findings. There's more, Trevor. Things that directly affect you. His expression sharpened. What do you mean? I opened the folder to reveal printed screenshots of bank transfers, business registration searches, and most damaging of all, recorded phone calls that Autumn had helped me obtain through perfectly legal channels. Last Tuesday, Vivienne called Hartwell and Associates, I said, watching Trevor's face. She identified herself as Delilah Crane, senior financial analyst at Meridian Financial Group, and inquired about private wealth management services for her successful consulting business. Trevor's coffee cup stopped halfway to his mouth. She called my firm, using your credentials. She gave them my employment history, my educational background, my credit score, which was excellent before she destroyed it, and asked about minimum investment requirements for their premium services. I slid the call transcript across the table. She scheduled a preliminary meeting for next Friday. Trevor read the transcript with growing horror. She was planning to open investment accounts at my firm, using your identity. Gets worse, I continued, feeling oddly detached as I watched his world reshape itself around these revelations. According to this conversation, she told your colleague Marcus that her boyfriend works there and had recommended the firm highly. She specifically mentioned your name. The color drained from Trevor's face. She was going to use our relationship to legitimize herself to my colleague, while investing stolen money under my name. I confirmed, money that would have been traced back to fraudulent credit accounts if anyone had bothered to look closely. Trevor stood up abruptly and began pacing beside our booth. His corporate composure finally cracked. Do you understand what this could have done to my career? If she'd opened accounts at my firm using stolen identities, if my colleagues had discovered the fraud after I'd vouched for her, you would have been implicated. At minimum, it would have looked like you were either incompetent or complicit. Complicit, Trevor repeated, the word hitting him like a physical blow. She could have destroyed my professional reputation, gotten me fired, maybe even charged as an accessory. I let that sink in for a moment before continuing. Trevor, I need you to understand something. This meeting tonight, it's not a coincidence. I've been investigating Vivienne's fraud for weeks, and when I saw how she was involving you, I realized you deserved to know what you were really dealing with. He stopped pacing and looked at me with a mixture of gratitude and suspicion. Why are you telling me this? She's your sister. Because, I said, pulling out the final document in my folder, she's also been using your relationship to commit additional fraud. The document was a loan application for $75,000, submitted just 3 days ago to Pinnacle Credit Union. The application listed Vivienne's annual income as $350,000, claimed she was engaged to Trevor Blackstone of Hartwell and Associates, and included Trevor's salary information as supporting documentation for the joint financial stability they would have after marriage. Trevor sat down heavily, staring at the application. Engaged? We've been dating for 6 weeks. According to this application, you've been together for 2 years and are planning a June wedding. She listed you as a co-applicant for the loan, though I'm guessing you never signed anything. Of course I never signed anything, Trevor said, his voice rising before he caught himself and lowered it again. I've never even been to that credit union. How did she forge your signature? I supplied, same way she forged mine for 3 years. Trevor pulled out his phone with shaking hands. I need to call Pinnacle Credit Union right now and report this fraud. Wait, I said, placing a hand on his arm. Before you do that, there's something else you need to know, something that affects both of us. He looked at me with eyes that had seen too much truth for one evening. What else could there possibly be? I took a deep breath, knowing this next revelation would be the hardest for him to hear. Vivienne isn't just targeting us, she's running a pattern with multiple victims, and you're not her first wealthy boyfriend. I pulled out Autumn's research on Vivienne's dating history, a timeline that revealed a disturbing pattern of targeting successful men, moving in quickly, and then mysteriously disappearing after a few months, usually citing work relocations or family emergency. Michael Chen, investment banker at Sterling Financial, dated Vivienne for 2 months last spring. I read from Autumn's notes. During their relationship, someone used his personal information to open 3 business credit lines. The fraud was discovered after Vivienne suddenly moved to take care of her sick grandmother in Florida. Trevor's jaw tightened. There's no sick grandmother, is there? Our grandmother died 8 years ago, I confirmed. David Rodriguez, commercial real estate developer, dated Vivienne 6 months before Michael. During their relationship, someone opened multiple construction loans using his business information. The loans went into default after Vivienne claimed she needed to move back home to help her sister through a difficult divorce. You weren't getting divorced, Trevor said flatly. I was happily married and completely unaware my sister was using my fictional marital problems to cover her exit strategies, I replied. Trevor was quiet for a long moment, processing the full scope of what I'd revealed. When he finally spoke, his voice was deadly calm in the way that wealthy, powerful men sound when they've decided someone has made a very expensive mistake. How many victims are we talking about, total? I consulted Autumn's research summary. 7 confirmed romantic targets over the past 3 years. Dozens of identity theft victims, including family members, former roommates, co-workers, even some of her high school friends. The total financial damage is approaching $2 million. $2 million, Trevor repeated slowly. She's been running a professional identity theft ring disguised as a dating life. That's exactly what she's been doing, I confirmed. And based on the timeline, you were scheduled to be victim number 8. Trevor stood up again, but this time his movements were controlled. Purpose. What do you need from me, Delilah? The question surprised me. What do you mean? I mean, you didn't just call this meeting to warn me, he said, his investment banker's instincts, recognizing a strategic partnership when he saw one. You're building a case against her, and you need my cooperation to make it stick. I smiled for the first time that evening. You're very good at reading people. It's my job, Trevor replied. So what's the plan? I pulled out one final document, a cooperation agreement that Autumn had drafted earlier that day, almost as if she'd predicted this conversation would happen. Friday's meeting at Hartwell and Associates, I said. The one where Vivienne plans to open investment accounts using my identity. I think we should let that meeting happen exactly as scheduled. Trevor's eyes narrowed as he realized what I was suggesting. You want to catch her in the act? I want to catch her on camera, with witnesses, attempting to commit federal fraud at one of the most prestigious financial firms in the state, I clarified. With her boyfriend sitting in the room, watching her lie about who she is. Trevor picked up the cooperation agreement and began reading it with the careful attention he'd give any contract worth millions of dollars. This could work, he said finally. But it's risky. If she realizes it's a setup, she won't, I said with confidence I didn't entirely feel. Vivienne's greatest weakness has always been her absolute certainty that she's the smartest person in the room. She's never considered the possibility that her victims might fight back. Trevor signed the agreement with a flourish that suggested he was looking forward to Friday's meeting almost as much as I was. Vivienne's about to learn, he said, that sometimes the people you underestimate are the ones who destroy you. The call came at 6:47 a.m. on Wednesday morning, jolting me from the first decent sleep I'd had in weeks. I fumbled for my phone, expecting to see Autumn's name or maybe Trevor's, but the caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize with a Florida area code. Is this Delilah Crane? The voice was female, older, with a slight southern accent that spoke of years spent in the sun. Yes, this is Delilah. My name is Patricia Hendricks. I got your number from a private investigator who said you might be able to help me with information about someone named Vivienne Crane. I sat up in bed, instantly alert. A private investigator? Mr. Richardson. I hired him 6 months ago when my grandson David started having financial problems he couldn't explain. Problems that started right after he broke up with a girl named Vivienne who claimed to be from Connecticut. David. The name clicked immediately. David Rodriguez, the commercial real estate developer from Autumn's research. I grabbed my laptop from the nightstand, pulling up the files we'd compiled on Vivienne's previous victims. Mrs. Hendricks, I think we need to talk. When would be convenient for you? 3 hours later, I was sitting in Autumn's law office conference room, with my laptop open to a video call with Patricia Hendricks, a sharp-eyed woman in her 70s, who looked like she'd spent her career managing difficult people and complicated situations. David's a good boy, Mrs. Hendricks was saying, but he's always been trusting when it comes to women. When he told me about this Vivienne girl, something didn't sit right. Too smooth, too convenient, too many stories that change depending on the day. Autumn leaned toward the camera. Miss Hendricks, I'm Delilah's attorney. What exactly prompted you to hire a private investigator? The bankruptcy, Mrs. Hendricks replied grimly. David's business went under almost overnight. Contractors weren't getting paid, projects were abandoned halfway through, and when we tried to figure out what happened to the money, we found loans David swore he'd never taken out. My stomach clenched. How much money are we talking about? $460,000, spread across 8 different construction loans, Mrs. Hendricks said, all opened during the 3 months David was dating that girl, all requiring David's business information and personal guarantees that someone had forged. Autumn and I exchanged glances. The pattern was becoming clear, and it was worse than we'd imagined. Mrs. Hendricks, I said carefully, has Mr. Richardson found other victims? That's why I'm calling you, dear. He's found 12 so far, scattered across 4 states, all of them men between 28 and 45, all of them financially successful, all of them with similar stories about a charming woman named Vivienne who disappeared after a few months of dating. 12 victims. My head spun with the implication. The investigator thinks there might be more, Mrs. Hendricks continued. He's been tracking credit applications and business loan fraud cases, looking for patterns. Your sister's been very busy, Miss Crane. Autumn pulled out a legal pad and started taking notes. Mrs. Hendricks, would Mr. Richardson be willing to share his findings with us? We're building a federal case against Vivienne Crane. He's been hoping someone would. These kinds of cases are hard to prosecute when the victims are scattered across state lines and don't know about each other. But if you could get them all together, it becomes a federal racketeering case. Autumn finished. RICO violations, interstate fraud, organized criminal enterprise. After we ended the call with Mrs. Hendricks, Autumn and I sat in stunned silence for several minutes. What had started as personal identity theft had revealed itself to be something far more sinister, a multi-state criminal operation that had been running for years. "We need to call Trevor," I said finally. "This changes everything about Friday's plan." But before I could dial Trevor's number, my phone rang again. This time it was a Connecticut number I didn't recognize. "Delilah Crane, this is Detective Sarah Morrison with the Connecticut State Police Financial Crimes Unit. I understand you've been investigating identity theft committed by someone named Vivienne Crane." My heart rate spiked. "Yes, that's correct. I'm calling because we've just received information from federal authorities about a multi-state investigation into organized identity theft. Your sister's name has come up in connection with several cases we're working on." I put the call on speaker so Autumn could hear. "Detective Morrison, what exactly are you investigating?" "We're part of a joint task force with the FBI looking into what appears to be a coordinated identity theft ring operating across the Northeast. The pattern involves targeting successful men through dating apps and social media, establishing romantic relationships, and then using access to personal information to commit large-scale financial fraud." Autumn leaned forward. "Detective, this is Autumn Walsh, Miss Crane's attorney. Are you saying Vivienne Crane is part of a larger criminal organization?" "That's what we're trying to determine," Detective Morrison replied. "What we know is that the same methods, the same target profiles, and in some cases the same forged documents, have appeared in cases from Maine to Virginia. Either we're dealing with someone who's been operating alone for years with incredible sophistication, or we're looking at a network." I thought about Vivienne's sudden transformation from struggling college dropout to successful entrepreneur, about the expensive clothes and cars that had appeared seemingly overnight, about the confidence with which she'd navigated complex financial fraud. "Detective," I said slowly, "what if it's both? What if Vivienne started working alone but then connected with other people doing the same thing?" "That's exactly what we're thinking," Detective Morrison confirmed. "Miss Crane, I'm going to need you to come in and provide a formal statement about your sister's activities. But first, I need to ask you something important. Do you have any plans to confront your sister before we can bring her in for questioning?" I looked at Autumn, who was shaking her head vigorously while making throat-cutting gestures. "Actually," I said, ignoring Autumn's warnings, "we do have a plan that might help your investigation. My sister is scheduled to attempt fraud at a major investment firm on Friday. We were planning to document her in the act." Silence on the other end of the line. "Then, Miss Crane, I need you to understand that if your sister is part of a larger criminal organization, approaching her could be extremely dangerous. These people don't just steal money, they eliminate threats." "What do you mean eliminate threats?" Autumn asked, her lawyer's instincts picking up on the detective's careful phrasing. "I mean that in 2 of our cases, victims who started asking too many questions about their stolen identities ended up dead," Detective Morrison said bluntly. "Car accidents, home invasions, overdoses of drugs they'd never used before. Nothing we could prove, but too many coincidences for comfort." The conference room felt suddenly cold. I thought about Vivienne's casual confidence, her complete lack of concern about getting caught, her certainty that she could manipulate any situation to her advantage. "Detective Morrison," I said, my voice steadier than I felt, "if we cancel Friday's meeting, won't that tip her off that we're onto her?" "Probably, but if you go through with it and she realizes it's a trap, you could end up as another coincidence." Autumn grabbed my arm. "Delilah, we're calling this off, right now, but I was thinking about David Rodriguez's bankruptcy, about Mrs. Hendricks hiring a private investigator to save her grandson, about 12 victims scattered across 4 states who had no idea they were connected, about Trevor, who was walking around with a target on his back simply because he'd had the misfortune to date my sister." "Detective Morrison," I said, "what if we could give you the whole network? What if Friday's meeting wasn't just about catching Vivienne but about catching everyone she's working with? What are you proposing?" I looked at Autumn, who was shaking her head frantically, then at my phone where Detective Morrison waited for an answer that could either solve a multi-state crime spree or get me killed. "I'm proposing that we turn me into bait," I said, "but not just for Vivienne, for all of them." The silence that followed was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat. When Detective Morrison finally spoke, Her voice carried the weight of someone who'd seen too many cases go wrong. Miss Crane, what you're suggesting is extremely dangerous. If these people realize you're working with law enforcement, they'll do what they always do, I interrupted. They'll try to eliminate the threat. But this time, you'll be ready for them. Autumn was writing absolutely not in large letters on her legal pad, but I pushed the pad aside. This was bigger than my personal vendetta against Vivienne. This was about stopping a criminal organization that had destroyed dozens of lives across multiple states. Detective Morrison, I continued, how many more victims will there be if we don't stop this now? How many more David Rodriguez will lose everything, while we play it safe? The detective was quiet for a long moment. If we do this, she said finally, it's not just your life on the line, it's the lives of every law enforcement officer who'll be protecting you. Are you prepared for that responsibility? I thought about the foreclosure notice that had started this whole nightmare, about the family dinner where my parents had praised Vivienne's criminal success, about Trevor discovering he was being used as a cover for federal fraud. Yes, I'm prepared. Then we need to meet, tonight, because if we're gonna catch a criminal network, we're gonna need a plan that's even more sophisticated than theirs. The FBI field office in Hartford was nothing like what I'd expected from television shows. Instead of dramatic lighting and urgent background music, it was a sterile government building with fluorescent lights, and the kind of industrial carpeting that absorbed all sound. Detective Morrison led us through a maze of cubicles to a conference room where 3 federal agents waited with laptops, recording equipment and expressions that suggested they'd seen enough criminal behavior to surprise them very little. Miss Crane, said Agent Rebecca Torres, a woman in her 40s with graying hair and intelligent eyes, thank you for coming forward. What you've uncovered has helped us connect cases across 6 states and potentially saved dozens of future victims. She opened a laptop and turned it toward me, revealing a digital map of the United States with red pins scattered across the northeast and southeast. Each pin represented a victim, and there were far more than the 12 Mrs. Hendricks had mentioned. We now have confirmed cases in Connecticut, Massachusetts, Rhode Island, New York, New Jersey, Pennsylvania, Maryland, Virginia, North Carolina, South Carolina, Georgia, and Florida, Agent Torres continued. 37 victims with documented losses totaling over $8 million. $8 million. I stared at the map, trying to process the scope of destruction that had apparently radiated out from my sister's criminal activity. The pattern is consistent across all cases, said Agent Kevin Marsh, a younger man with the focused intensity of someone who'd built his career on following money trails, target identification through social media and professional networks, relationship establishment, systematic personal information gathering, and coordinated financial exploitation using sophisticated forgery and identity manipulation techniques. Agent Torres clicked to another screen, showing a network diagram that looked like something from a spy movie. What we've discovered is that your sister isn't operating alone. She's part of what we believe is a coordinated criminal enterprise with at least 12 active members across multiple states. The diagram showed Vivienne's photo in the center, connected by lines to other photos, men and women I'd never seen before, but whose professional headshots suggested they were as polished and convincing as my sister. Each member specializes in different target demographics, Agent Marsh explained. Vivienne targets successful men in finance and real estate. This woman, Marina Volkov, targets female entrepreneurs and small business owners. This man, Alex Santos, specializes in recently divorced professionals with substantial assets. Detective Morrison leaned forward. The sophistication level is extraordinary. They share resources, coordinate territories to avoid overlap, and most importantly, they have access to professional-grade document forgery and identity verification systems. Agent Torres pulled up another screen, showing what appeared to be a legitimate business website. On the surface, Meridian Identity Solutions appears to be a standard background check company. They provide employment verification, credit reporting, and identity confirmation services to legitimate businesses. But, I prompted, sensing there was more. But they're also providing those same services to criminals, Agent Marsh said. For the right price, they'll create completely fabricated employment histories, generate false credit reports that show excellent scores for people with destroyed credit,
and provide verification calls to banks and lending institutions. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity, so when Vivienne applied for loans using my identity and the banks called to verify my employment and income, they reached Meridian Identity Solutions, who confirmed whatever story your sister had told them, Detective Morrison finished. The banks thought they were conducting due diligence, but they were actually getting verification from the criminals themselves. Agent Torres clicked to a new screen, showing financial records. This is where it gets even more sophisticated. The network doesn't just steal identities to take out loans, they've created an entire ecosystem for laundering the stolen money. The screen showed a complex web of shell companies, offshore accounts, and investment vehicles that made my head spin. Stolen funds are moved through a series of fake consulting businesses, then invested in legitimate-looking ventures that generate clean money on the other end. Vivienne's consulting business, I said slowly. It's not completely fake, correct? Agent Marsh confirmed. She actually does provide services to some of these shell companies, generating legitimate income that she can report on tax returns and use to qualify for even larger loans. It's brilliant, actually. The criminal activity funds the legitimate business, which then provides cover for more criminal activity.
Autumn was taking notes rapidly. How long has this been going on? We think the network has been operating for at least 5 years, Agent Torres replied. What started as individual identity thieves finding each other online has evolved into a sophisticated criminal enterprise with its own infrastructure and support systems. Detective Morrison pulled out a thick folder. Miss Crane, I need to show you something that directly affects your situation. We've been monitoring communications between network members, and your name has come up in several conversations. She opened the folder to reveal printed transcripts of phone calls and text messages. My blood ran cold as I read Vivienne's words, discussing me like I was a business asset rather than her sister. VVs, the Connecticut situation is getting complicated. The sister is asking questions. M, how much does she know? V, too much. She's got financial records, and she's smart enough to put pieces together. M, recommendations. V, standard protocol. Make it look accidental. Her trouble on Route 9 has worked before. I stared at the transcript, my hands shaking. She's planning to have me killed. That conversation took place yesterday morning, Detective Morrison said gently. Which is why we moved up this timeline and why you're now under federal protection. Agent Torres leaned forward. Miss Crane, your sister and her associates view you as a direct threat to an $8 million criminal operation. They're not going to let family loyalty stop them from protecting their business. But there's good news, Agent Marsh added. That conversation also gave us probable cause for surveillance warrants on all network members. As of this morning, we have federal judges authorizing wiretaps, email monitoring, and financial surveillance on the entire organization. Which brings us to Friday's operation, Agent Torres said, pulling up a new screen showing the floor plan of the Hartwell & Associates building. We're not just going to catch your sister attempting fraud, we're going to catch her entire network coming to her rescue when things go wrong. Detective Morrison pointed to different areas on the building schematic. Based on the communications we've intercepted, when Vivienne realizes she's walking into a trap on Friday, she'll activate an emergency protocol. Other network members will converge on the location to extract her, and we'll be waiting, Agent Marsh said with satisfaction. Surveillance teams, tactical units, financial crimes specialists. The whole network is about to walk into a federal dragnet. I looked around the room at these law enforcement professionals, who were treating my personal nightmare like a major criminal investigation, which I was beginning to understand it actually was. What do you need me to do? I asked. Agent Torres smiled for the first time since I'd arrived. You're going to do exactly what you'd planned. Go to that meeting, present yourself as Delilah Crane seeking investment services, and let your sister attempt to defraud one of the most prestigious financial institutions in Connecticut. But this time, Detective Morrison added, you'll be wearing a wire surrounded by federal agents and protected by the full resources of a joint task force that's been building this case for 18 months. Autumn looked up from her notes. What about after? When this is over, what happens to Delilah's stolen identity and destroyed credit? Full federal assistance with identity restoration, Agent Torres replied. Priority processing for credit repair, victim compensation funds, and witness protection if necessary. I thought about everything that had led to this moment. The foreclosure notice, the family dinner, Trevor's suspicions, Mrs. Hendrick's call. What had started as personal betrayal had revealed a criminal conspiracy that had destroyed dozens of lives across multiple states. There's one more thing, I said, looking at each agent in turn. My parents, they have no idea what Vivienne really is. When this goes public, we'll make sure they're protected and informed appropriately, Agent Torres assured me. This kind of revelation is always difficult for family. Detective Morrison gathered the files. Miss Crane, are you ready to help us shut down one of the most sophisticated identity theft networks we've ever encountered? I thought about David Rodriguez losing his business, about Trevor nearly becoming another victim, about the 37 red pins on that map representing lives destroyed by people I'd trusted completely. Yes, I said, I'm ready. Agent Torres stood and extended her hand. Then let's go catch some criminals. Friday morning arrived with the kind of perfect autumn weather that would have been beautiful under any other circumstance. I stood in my walk-in closet at 6 a.m., staring at my professional wardrobe while Agent Torres's voice echoed in my earpiece, running through final preparations for what she'd called the most complex financial crime sting operation in Connecticut history. Remember, Delilah. Her voice was calm and reassuring despite the magnitude of what we were about to attempt. You're not acting today. You're just being yourself, someone seeking legitimate investment services. Let Vivienne do all the lying. I selected a navy blue suit that projected competence and success, the kind of outfit the real Delilah Crane would wear to an important financial meeting. The irony wasn't lost on me that I was dressing up as myself to catch someone pretending to be me. James appeared in the doorway with coffee and the expression of a man who'd spent the night convinced he was about to become a widower. Are you sure about this? It's not too late to call it off. It's way too late to call it off, I replied, adjusting the tiny recording device that Agent Marsh had shown me how to conceal in my jacket lapel. 37 victims, James. $8 million. This has to end today. The drive to Hartwell and Associates took 25 minutes through Hartford's financial district, past buildings that housed some of the most prestigious wealth management firms in New England. I'd made this same drive dozens of times for meetings with my own financial advisor, but never with federal agents in unmarked cars trailing me, and never with the knowledge that my own sister had marked me for assassination. Trevor met me in the lobby at exactly 9:45 a.m., looking every inch the successful investment banker in his charcoal gray suit and Hermes tie. To any observer, we appeared to be exactly what we were supposed to be. A successful woman and her friend meeting for a routine investment consultation. Are you ready for this? He asked quietly as we rode the elevator to the 14th floor. As ready as anyone can be to watch their sister commit federal crimes, I replied, noting the almost invisible security cameras that Agent Torres had assured me were now being monitored by federal surveillance teams. The reception area of Hartwell and Associates was designed to intimidate and impress in equal measure. Marble floors, leather furniture, original oil paintings, and the kind of hushed atmosphere that suggested serious money changed hands here regularly. The receptionist, a polished woman in her 30s named Catherine, smiled professionally as she announced our arrival. Miss Crane and Mr. Blackstone, Mr. Harrison will see you in Conference Room B. Can I offer you coffee or water while you wait? Conference Room B was a testament to understated wealth. Mahogany table, leather chairs, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Hartford's skyline. Agent Torres's voice whispered in my earpiece that surveillance teams were positioned in adjacent offices and that recording equipment was capturing everything. At exactly 10 a.m., the door opened and Vivienne walked in wearing what I immediately recognized as a $3,000 Armani suit, carrying a leather briefcase that probably cost more than most people's monthly rent. Behind her was a man I'd never seen before, tall, silver-haired, wearing the kind of custom-tailored suit that suggested serious money and questionable ethics. Delilah, Vivienne exclaimed with the perfect mix of surprise and delight, as if encountering me here was the most wonderful coincidence imaginable. What are you doing here? I have a 10 a.m. appointment, I replied carefully, watching her face for any sign that she suspected a trap. Investment consultation. What about you? Same thing, actually, Vivienne said, then turned to the man beside her with a smile that made my skin crawl. Delilah, I'd like you to meet my business partner, Marcus Wellington. Marcus, this is my sister I've told you so much about. Business partner. Not boyfriend, not consultant, but business partner. The man who Agent Torres had identified as one of the network's primary money launderers was being introduced as Vivienne's legitimate associate. Marcus Wellington extended a manicured hand with the confidence of someone accustomed to deceiving successful people. Vivienne speaks of you constantly. She's very proud of your success at Meridian Financial. Thank you, I replied, noting how easily he referenced my real employer while standing next to my sister who was about to impersonate me. What kind of business are you and Vivienne in together? Strategic financial consulting, Marcus replied smoothly. We help high-net-worth individuals optimize their investment portfolios and explore alternative wealth-building opportunities. The door opened again, and David Harrison, Trevor's colleague, entered with the kind of professional enthusiasm that suggested he saw substantial commissions in his immediate future. Behind him came another man I didn't recognize, but whose presence made Agent Torres's voice immediately tense in my earpiece. Delilah? That's Alex Santos, one of the network's primary identity theft specialists. This is bigger than we anticipated. Ladies and gentlemen, David announced, welcome to Hartwell & Associates. I understand we have several parties interested in our premium wealth management services. Trevor stepped forward with practiced ease. David, I'd like to introduce Delilah Crane, the client I mentioned. She's interested in discussing investment options for her consulting business. Excellent, David replied, then turned to Vivienne and her companions. And you are? Delilah Crane, Vivienne said with absolute confidence, extending her hand to David while I sat 3 feet away. I believe I spoke with someone in your office earlier this week about investment services for my consulting firm. The room went completely silent. David looked between Vivienne and me with the expression of a man who'd just realized he was in the middle of something far more complicated than a routine investment meeting. I'm sorry, David said, carefully, but which of you is Delilah Crane? I am, we said, simultaneous. Trevor's face was a masterpiece of controlled confusion. David, this is Delilah Crane, he said, gesturing toward me. I've known her for several years through professional connection. And this is Delilah Crane, Marcus Wellington added smoothly, placing a protective hand on Vivienne's shoulder. I've been working with her for over a year on various financial projects. Agent Torres's voice crackled in my earpiece. Perfect. Let them dig the hole deep. David Harrison had clearly never encountered this particular type of problem in his investment banking career. Perhaps there's been some kind of misunderstanding. Could I see identification from both parties? I reached into my purse and withdrew my driver's license, placing it on the mahogany table. Vivienne did the same, producing an identification card that looked exactly like mine except for one crucial detail. The photo showed her face instead of mine. David examined both licenses with the careful attention of someone who was beginning to realize he might be witnessing a federal crime. These appear to be issued to the same person, but the photographs are different. That's because she's using my identity, I said calmly, finally dropping the pretense. My name is Delilah Crane, and the woman sitting across from me is my sister Vivienne, who has been committing identity theft using my personal information for over 3 years. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 20 degrees. Vivienne's confident expression flickered for just a moment before settling into something much more dangerous. That's ridiculous, she said, with a laugh that sounded almost genuine. Delilah, what are you talking about? Are you having some kind of breakdown? Marcus Wellington's demeanor shifted subtly, his businessman's charm replaced by something predatory. This is obviously a very personal family matter, he said to David. Perhaps we should reschedule this meeting. Actually, Trevor said, his voice carrying new authority, I think we should continue. David, could you please call building security? I believe we're witnessing attempted fraud. That's when Alex Santos moved toward the door with the fluid motion of someone accustomed to quick exits, and Agent Torres's voice exploded in my earpiece. All units, subjects are attempting to flee. Move in. The conference room door burst open as federal agents flooded in, followed by uniformed security officers and Detective Morrison. Vivienne's perfect composure finally cracked as she found herself surrounded by law enforcement officers with badges and guns.
Vivienne Crane, Marcus Wellington, Alex Santos, Agent Torres announced as she entered the room, "You're under arrest for conspiracy to commit identity theft, wire fraud, money laundering, and racketeering under the RICO Act." Vivienne looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before, pure calculating hatred that made me understand why the FBI had been worried about my safety. "You have no idea what you've done," she said quietly as Agent Marsh placed handcuffs on her wrist. "You have no idea who these people are or what they're capable of." "Actually," I replied, standing as more agents led Marcus and Alex out of the conference room, "I have a very good idea. That's why they're all going to prison." As they led my sister away, she turned back one last time with a smile that chilled me to the bone. "This isn't over, Delilah. It's never over." But looking around the conference room at the federal agents, the evidence they'd just gathered, and the 37 case files that would finally see justice, I realized she was wrong. For the first time in 3 years, it was finally over. The holding cell at the Federal Detention Center in Hartford was nothing like the sterile conference rooms where I'd been meeting with agents for the past week. Concrete walls, fluorescent lights, and the kind of institutional atmosphere that reminded everyone present that this was serious business. I sat across from Vivienne at a metal table bolted to the floor, separated by reinforced glass and connected only by phones that I knew were being recorded by federal authorities. She looked different in the orange jumpsuit, smaller somehow, though her eyes still held the calculating intelligence that had fooled so many victims over the years. Her perfectly styled hair was pulled back in a regulation ponytail, and without her expensive makeup she looked more like the community college dropout she'd actually been than the successful entrepreneur she'd pretended to be. "You came," she said when she picked up the phone, sounding genuinely surprised. "I wasn't sure you would." "Agent Torres said you wanted to make a deal," I replied, keeping my voice neutral despite the rage that still simmered every time I looked at her. "Something about providing information in exchange for reduced charges." Vivienne smiled, and for a moment she looked like the sister I'd grown up with, mischievous, charming, absolutely convinced she could talk her way out of any situation. "I have information that could save you a lot of trouble, Delilah. Information about things that are still coming your way." "What kind of things?" "The network is bigger than what the FBI arrested on Friday," she said, leaning forward with the intensity of someone sharing a crucial secret. "Marcus and Alex were middle management. The people who really run this operation are still out there, and they're not happy about what you've done." I felt a chill run down my spine but kept my expression steady. "Who are the people who really run?" "That depends," Vivienne said, her tone shifting to the negotiating voice I remembered from our childhood. "What are you willing to offer for that information?" "I'm not offering anything," I replied. "I'm not a federal prosecutor and I'm not your lawyer. If you want to make a deal, you need to talk to Agent Torres." Vivienne's expression hardened. "You always were the rule follower, weren't you? Even now, when your life might depend on it, you can't bend just a little bit." "My life." "There are people who lost millions of dollars because of your little FBI operation," she said, her voice taking on an edge I'd never heard before. "People who don't accept business losses quietly. They know where you live, Delilah. They know where James works. They know your routines, your habits, your vulnerabilities." The threat was delivered with such casual certainty that I believed her completely. This wasn't Vivienne being dramatic or manipulative. This was her sharing tactical information from a criminal organization that had apparently marked me for elimination. "What do you want?" I asked direct. "I want you to call Agent Torres and tell her you're willing to recommend a plea agreement," Vivienne said. "Something that gets me relocated to minimum security and eligible for early release. In exchange, I'll give the FBI everything they need to roll up the entire East Coast operation." I stared at my sister through the reinforced glass, trying to process the audacity of what she was proposing. Even facing federal racketeering charges, even sitting in a detention cell wearing prison clothes, she was still trying to manipulate the situation to her advantage. "You destroyed my life," I said quietly. "You stole my identity, ruined my credit, almost cost me my marriage and my home. You were planning to have me killed, and now you want me to help you get a lighter sentence." "I want you to help yourself stay alive," Vivienne corrected. "The people I'm talking about don't care about family loyalty or sisterly bonds. If they decide you're a continuing threat to their operation, they'll eliminate you as efficiently as they've eliminated other problems." "Other problem?" Vivienne's expression softened with what might have been genuine concern. "Remember David Rodriguez, the real estate developer in Florida?" He didn't die in a car accident, Delilah. He died because he hired a private investigator and started connecting dots between different identity theft cases. My blood ran cold. Mrs. Hendricks had never mentioned that her grandson was dead. She'd talked about his bankruptcy, his financial ruin, but not his death. "You're lying," I said, but even as I spoke the words I remembered Agent Torres mentioning victims who'd ended up dead after asking too many questions. "Michael Chen, the investment banker who dated me before Trevor," Vivienne continued relentlessly. "Heart attack at 32, no previous cardiac issues, just happened to occur the day before he was scheduled to meet with federal investigators about fraudulent business loans." I thought about Trevor, about how close he'd come to being another victim, about how his suspicions could have made him a target just like David Rodriguez and Michael Chen. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked. "Because despite everything that's happened between us, you're still my sister," Vivienne said, and for the first time since I'd sat down, her voice carried genuine emotion. "And because the people who run this network don't distinguish between willing participants and unwilling victims. If they decide the FBI operation compromised too much of their infrastructure, they'll eliminate everyone connected to it, including you, especially me," she confirmed. "I know too much, and now I'm in federal custody where they can't control what I say or who I say it to. The only thing keeping me alive right now is the possibility that I might still be useful to them." I leaned back in my chair, trying to process the implications of what she was telling me. If Vivienne was right, then Friday's arrests hadn't ended the threat, they'd escalated. Instead of being a victim of identity theft, I was now a target of a criminal organization with the resources and willingness to commit murder. "What exactly are you proposing?"
"I give the FBI everything," Vivienne said. "Names, locations, financial structures, operational methods, planned targets, everything I know about the network's East Coast operations. In exchange, you recommend that I be placed in witness protection instead of general population, and that my cooperation be factored into my sentencing. And in return, you get to live long enough to enjoy your restored credit score," she said with a bitter smile. "And maybe, just maybe, we prevent a few dozen more people from becoming victims." I stared at my sister, trying to reconcile the woman who'd systematically destroyed my financial life with the woman who was now offering to risk her own life to provide information that could save mine and prevent future crimes. "There's something else," Vivienne said, her voice dropping to barely above a whisper. "Something I haven't told the FBI yet, because I wanted to tell you first." "What?" "Mom and Dad," she said, and my heart stopped. "Their retirement accounts, their savings, the equity in their house, it's all gone. Delilah. I used their information too, and when the network realizes I've been arrested, they're going to drain everything that's left to cover their losses." The room seemed to spin around. Our parents, who had spent 30 years defending Vivienne, who had praised her success and dismissed my concerns, were about to lose everything because of the daughter they'd protected. "How long do we have?" I asked. "Hours, maybe," Vivienne replied. "The network moves fast when they think they're compromised. If you want to save Mom and Dad's retirement, you need to get Agent Torres down here right now." I stood up, my decision made. "And if I do this, if I recommend leniency for your cooperation, what guarantee do I have that you're telling the truth?" Vivienne met my eyes through the glass with an expression I'd never seen from her before. Complete, devastating honesty. "You don't," she said simply. "You just have to decide whether you trust me enough to risk it, or whether you'd rather watch our parents lose everything while wondering if you could have prevented it." I picked up the phone to call Agent Torres, knowing that whatever I decided in the next few minutes would determine not just Vivienne's fate, but the fate of our entire family. "Agent Torres," I said when she answered, "I'm at the detention center with Vivienne. She says she's ready to give you everything, but there's something about our parents that can't wait." In the background, I could hear the urgent sounds of federal agents mobilizing for another emergency operation. And I realized that Friday's arrests had been just the beginning of a much larger and more dangerous game. The federal courthouse in Hartford had never seen anything like the sentencing hearing for United States Delilah Crane, Wellington Santos and 17 other defendants. The media attention was so intense that Agent Torres had arranged for me to enter through a back entrance, away from the cameras and reporters who'd been covering what the Connecticut Post had dubbed the Connecticut identity theft conspiracy. 6 months had passed since that desperate phone call from the detention center. 6 months during which the FBI had used Vivienne's information to dismantle what they now called the largest organized identity theft network in U.S. history. 43 arrests across 12 states, over $50 million in recovered assets, and federal charges that would put the leadership away for decades. I sat in the gallery next to James, Autumn, and Trevor, watching as Vivienne was led into the courtroom wearing a navy blue suit that the government had provided for her sentencing. She looked smaller than I remembered, her face pale and drawn from months in federal custody, but her posture still carried the confidence that had made her such an effective criminal. Judge Patricia Hamilton, a stern woman in her 60s who'd built her reputation on complex financial crimes, reviewed the thick sentencing memorandum with the careful attention that had made her one of the most respected federal judges in Connecticut. "Crane," Judge Hamilton said, looking directly at my sister, "in 30 years on this bench, I have rarely encountered a case that combined such sophisticated criminal enterprise with such devastating impact on individual victims. Your cooperation with federal authorities has been substantial and has resulted in the dismantling of a network that might otherwise have continued operating for years." I thought about the events that had followed my meeting with Vivienne at the detention center. Agent Torres and her team had worked through the night to freeze my parents' accounts, just hours before the network's automated systems would have drained them completely. Mom and Dad had lost about $30,000, devastating but not catastrophic, instead of their entire retirement nest egg. The information Vivienne provided had led to raids across 6 states, the seizure of offshore accounts containing over $20 million, and the identification of victims who'd never realized they'd been targeted. The network had been even more sophisticated than the FBI had initially suspected, with connections to international money laundering operations and ties to organized crime families in 3 countries. However, Judge Hamilton continued, "Cooperation with authorities, while commendable, cannot erase the harm you've caused to dozens of victims, including members of your own family." The court has received victim impact statements from 37 individuals whose lives were fundamentally altered by your criminal activities. The victim impact statements had been brutal to read. David Rodriguez's grandmother, describing how her grandson's bankruptcy had led to his suicide, not the car accident Vivienne had claimed, but a deliberate overdose when he couldn't face the shame of losing everything. Michael Chen's widow explaining how the stress of the fraudulent business loans had triggered the heart attack that killed her husband. Story after story of lives destroyed by criminals who saw other people's identities as nothing more than financial instruments. But there had been positive developments too. The federal government's Victim Compensation Fund, funded by seized assets, had provided substantial payments to help restore damaged credit and compensate for financial loss. Trevor had been promoted to senior partner at Hartwell and Associates, largely due to his role in exposing the fraud. Several of the victims had formed a support group that was helping other identity theft survivors navigate the recovery process. "Crane," the judge said, "before I impose sentence, do you wish to address the court?" Vivienne stood slowly, her hands clasped in front of her, and for a moment I saw the little girl who used to practice speeches in our childhood bedroom mirror. "Your Honor," she began, her voice clear and steady, "I want to start by acknowledging the full scope of what I've done, not just the financial crimes, but the betrayal of trust, the destruction of relationships, and the harm I've caused to people who loved me and trusted." She turned slightly to look at me, her eyes meeting mine for the first time since her arrest. "I used my sister's love for me as a weapon against her. I exploited her loyalty, manipulated her kindness, and when she finally stood up to me, I planned to have her killed rather than face the consequences of my actions. There is no excuse for that level of betrayal." I felt James squeeze my hand as Vivienne continued. "I've spent the past 6 months in federal custody, thinking about how I became someone capable of such cruelty. The truth is, I became addicted to the power that came from being able to create false identities, to walk into any situation, and convince people I was someone else. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the ability to be whoever I wanted to be, whenever I wanted to be them." She paused, visibly struggling with emotion. "The network I joined promised me freedom from consequences. But what it actually gave me was freedom from humanity. I stopped seeing my victims as people and started seeing them as opportunities, I convinced myself that successful people could afford to lose what I was taking, that they wouldn't even miss it. Judge Hamilton listened without expression as Vivienne detailed her transformation from struggling college dropout to sophisticated criminal. Working with the FBI these past months has shown me the real cost of what we did. Not just the financial damage, but the destroyed marriages, the lost homes, the people who've never been able to trust again. I can't undo that damage, but I can make sure that every person responsible for it is held accountable. She turned back to face the judge. Your Honor, I know I don't deserve leniency. I know that cooperation with authorities doesn't balance the scales of justice, but I'm asking you to consider that the information I've provided has prevented hundreds of future victims and has helped recover assets that will provide compensation for the people I hurt. Judge Hamilton reviewed her notes for several minutes before speaking. Crane, the court acknowledges your cooperation and apparent remorse. The government's motion for downward departure based on your substantial assistance is well supported by the evidence. However, the severity of your crimes and the sophisticated nature of your criminal enterprise require significant punishment. She paused, looking directly at Vivienne. I hereby sentence you to 8 years in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. You are ordered to pay restitution in the amount of $2.3 million to be distributed among your victims according to the court's allocation. Upon your release, you will be prohibited from accessing any financial accounts without prior approval from your probation officer, and you will be required to maintain lawful employment and submit to regular financial audits. 8 years. Vivienne would be 36 when she was released, assuming good behavior. The other network members had received sentences ranging from 12 to 25 years, with the leadership facing life imprisonment under the RICO statute. As the marshals led Vivienne away, she turned one final time to look at me. This time, instead of the calculating coldness I'd seen in the Hartwell and Associates conference room, her expression carried something that might have been peace. Outside the courthouse, Agent Torres found me on the steps where I was trying to process everything I'd just witnessed. How do you feel? She asked. I thought about the question seriously. Sad, I said finally, but not guilty anymore. Good, Agent Torres replied. Because there's something else. The Victim Compensation Fund has approved your claim for full restitution, plus damages for emotional distress and identity restoration costs. The check should arrive next week. How much? Enough to pay off your mortgage, restore your credit completely, and fund that sabbatical you mentioned wanting to take. I looked back at the courthouse where my sister would spend the next 8 years, then at the city where I'd rebuilt my life from the wreckage she'd created. Agent Torres, I said, I'd like to do something with that money, something that would help other victims. She smiled. I was hoping you'd say that. There's a non-profit organization that helps identity theft survivors navigate the recovery process. They could use someone with your experience and expertise. As James and I walked back to our car, I realized that for the first time in years, I wasn't thinking about what Vivienne had taken from me. I was thinking about what I could build with what remained. 2 years later, I stood at the podium of the National Conference on Financial Crimes in Chicago, looking out at an audience of federal agents, prosecutors, victim advocates, and financial professionals who had gathered to learn about identity theft prevention and recovery. The woman speaking to them bore little resemblance to the frightened person who had found that first credit card statement in her kitchen 3 years ago. When I discovered my sister had stolen my identity, I began, my voice carrying easily through the packed auditorium. I thought my story was about family betrayal and financial fraud. What I learned was that it was actually about systemic vulnerabilities in our financial infrastructure that allows sophisticated criminals to exploit the very trust that makes commerce possible. The presentation slides behind me showed statistics that would have been unimaginable when this journey began. Since the dismantling of the Connecticut network, similar operations had been identified and prosecuted in 18 states. The Identity Recovery Foundation, the nonprofit I'd founded with my victim compensation money, had helped over 3,000 identity theft survivors navigate the complex process of reclaiming their financial lives. The network my sister belonged to succeeded because they understood something that legitimate institutions often overlook, I continued, advancing to a slide showing the sophisticated verification systems the criminals had developed. Identity theft isn't just about stealing personal information, it's about creating parallel realities,
where criminals can exist as successful, creditworthy individuals, while their victims bear the consequence. In the audience, I spotted Agent Torres, now the head of the FBI's Financial Crimes Task Force, and Detective Morrison, who had parlayed her work on our case into a position with the Treasury Department's Identity Theft Prevention Program. Next to them sat Trevor, who had become something of a celebrity in the investment banking world for his role in exposing financial fraud. But the person I was most proud to see was sitting in the front row, my mother, wearing a volunteer badge from the Identity Recovery Foundation. The past 2 years had been difficult for my parents, who had struggled to reconcile their image of Vivienne with the reality of her crimes. Dad had retired early from his position at the hospital, unable to handle the whispered conversations and pointed questions from colleagues. Mom had initially retreated into denial and depression, but gradually, as the scope of Vivienne's victims became clear, something had shifted. Mom had started attending the support group meetings I'd organized for families of criminals, connecting with other parents who were grappling with similar betrayal. She'd begun volunteering at the foundation, using her natural warmth and organizational skills to help new victims navigate the bureaucratic maze of credit restoration. One of the most important lessons we've learned, I said, clicking to a new slide, is that recovery from identity theft isn't just about restoring credit scores and bank balances, it's about rebuilding trust in institutions, in relationships, and in our own judgment. The slide showed photos from our monthly support group meetings, faces of people who had learned to smile again after having their financial lives destroyed by people they trusted, teachers whose colleagues had stolen their identity, adult children whose parents had used their social security numbers to hide gambling debts, spouses who had discovered their partners were funding secret lives with fraudulent credit. Each of these people faced the same choice I faced, I explained. They could remain victims, defined by what was taken from them, or they could become advocates, defined by what they chose to build from the wreckage. After the presentation, I was surrounded by audience members sharing their own stories, asking for advice, requesting resources for their own communities. A prosecutor from Texas wanted to know about our victim impact assessment tool. A banker from Oregon was interested in our financial institution training programs. A mother from Florida, whose daughter had stolen her identity to fund a drug addiction, just wanted to know that recovery was possible. It is, I told her, remembering my own mother's journey from enabler to advocate. Not easy, but possible. Later that evening, James and I sat in our hotel room, overlooking Lake Michigan, reviewing emails from foundation supporters and planning the next phase of our expansion. The financial security that the Victim Compensation Fund had provided meant I could dedicate myself full-time to this work, while James had taken a position with a law firm specializing in white-collar crime defense. "There's something I need to tell you," James said, looking up from his laptop with an expression I couldn't quite read. My heart skipped. After everything we'd been through, unexpected news still made me nervous. "Vivienne's parole hearing is next month," he continued. "She's been a model prisoner, completed her GED, earned a bachelor's degree in social work through the prison education program. Her counselors think she's genuinely rehabilitated." I stared out at the city lights reflecting on the lake, processing this information. Vivienne had served just over 2 years of her 8-year sentence, but federal prisoners could be eligible for early release under certain circumstances. "What do you think?" James asked. I said slowly, "that rehabilitation is the point of the justice system. If she's genuinely changed, if she's prepared to make different choices, then she deserves the chance to prove it, even after everything she did, especially after everything she did," I replied. "The person who destroyed my life was someone who never faced real consequences for her action. Maybe the person who comes out of prison will be someone who has." My phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number, and for a moment I felt the old familiar fear that had taken months of therapy to overcome. But the message was from a woman in Denver, whose ex-husband had used their children's identities to fund a gambling addiction. "Attended your presentation online," the text read. "Starting a support group here using your materials. Thank you for showing us that we're not alone." I showed the message to James, feeling the same sense of purpose that had sustained me through 2 years of building something meaningful from the ashes of my destroyed credit. "You know what's funny?" I said. "Vivienne always wanted to be someone else, someone more important, more successful, more admired. She thought identity theft was the way to do that, and instead, she helped me become the person I was always meant to be. Someone who fights for justice, who protects the vulnerable, who turns personal trauma into systemic change. The next morning, I would fly back to Connecticut to meet with legislators about strengthening identity theft law. Next week, I would testify before a congressional subcommittee about financial crimes prevention. Next month, I would open our 5th regional office, this one focused specifically on helping elderly victims of family financial abuse. But tonight, I simply sat with my husband in a hotel room overlooking Lake Michigan, reading emails from people whose lives had been shattered by criminals and rebuilt through community. Understanding that the most profound victory wasn't the prison sentences or the recovered money, it was the transformation of victims into advocates, of trauma into purpose, of endings into beginning. Somewhere in a federal prison in Pennsylvania, Vivienne was probably preparing for her parole hearing, hoping for a second chance to build a life worth living, and for the first time since this nightmare began, I found myself hoping she would get it. Because forgiveness, I had learned, wasn't about forgetting what someone had done to you, it was about refusing to let what they had done define who you chose to become. 3 years after finding that first fraudulent credit card statement, I was finally free, not because my sister was in prison, but because I had chosen to build something beautiful from the ruins she had left behind. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up, just click and check them out.